The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training facility as Lieutenant Sarah Chen stepped off the transport truck. Her small frame and youthful appearance drew immediate attention from the group of cadets gathered near the barracks. At 28, she looked barely old enough to be out of college, let alone wearing the crisp uniform of a naval officer. "Look what we got here," sneered Cadet Jackson, a tall, muscular young man who clearly considered himself the unofficial leader of the group. Another desk jockey trying to play soldier. Sarah kept her expression neutral as she shouldered her duffel bag. The other cadets began to circle around her, their faces showing mixtures of amusement and disdain. She had seen this before. The automatic assumption that her petite stature and quiet demeanor meant she was weak. "I'm Lieutenant Chen, reporting for the advanced training program," she said calmly, addressing the group. Cadet Morrison, a stocky redhead with freckles covering his face, laughed loudly. "Advanced training? Lady, you look like you'd have trouble opening a pickle jar, let alone handling what we do here." The facility around them buzzed with activity. Other training groups were running obstacle courses, practicing hand-to-hand combat, and conducting weapons drills. The sound of shouted commands and the crack of gunfire from the shooting range filled the air. This was Fort Braxton, one of the military's most demanding training centers, where only the toughest survived the rigorous programs. Sarah had been assigned here under special orders that she couldn't discuss. Her real identity and background were classified at the highest levels. As far as these cadets knew, she was just another officer being rotated through their program. They had no idea that she had spent the last 6 years operating in some of the world's most dangerous locations. "Maybe we should help you find the right building," suggested Cadet Williams, a lanky blonde with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "I think the administrative offices are that way. You probably got lost." The group of 8 cadets had now completely surrounded her. Sarah noticed how they positioned themselves, blocking her path to the barracks while leaving themselves room to move. It was basic intimidation tactics, the kind bullies used when they thought they had found an easy target. "We don't have room for people who can't pull their weight," Jackson continued, stepping closer. "This isn't some corporate training retreat. People get hurt here. Sometimes badly." Sarah set down her duffel bag carefully. She had hoped to keep a low profile during her time here, but it seemed these young men had other plans. Their instructor, Sergeant Major Rodriguez, was nowhere to be seen. He was probably in the main building, reviewing training schedules and preparing for the day's exercises. "I appreciate the concern," Sarah replied evenly, "but I think I can handle whatever the program requires." This statement caused an eruption of laughter from the group. Cadet Peterson, who had been quiet until now, shook his head in disbelief. "Lady, yesterday we had a Navy linebacker washout of this program. Guy was 6'4" and built like a tank. You think you can do what he couldn't?" The morning was getting warmer, and Sarah could see sweat already forming on some of the cadets' faces. They were worked up, feeding off each other's energy, and convinced they were dealing with someone completely out of her depth. She recognized the group dynamic. Young men trying to prove their toughness by targeting what they perceived as weakness. "Look, we're trying to help you here," Morrison said, his tone becoming more aggressive. "This place will eat you alive. Why don't you just pack up that little bag and request a transfer to somewhere more suited to your abilities?" Sarah glanced around the facility again. She could see other training groups in the distance, but none close enough to intervene if things escalated. The cadets seemed to be growing bolder, mistaking her calm demeanor for fear or uncertainty. "The thing is," Jackson continued, now standing directly in front of her, "we've worked too hard to get here to have someone like you drag down our scores. This is serious business, and frankly, you don't look like you belong." What none of them knew was that Sarah Chen had earned her place in the Navy SEALs through years of grueling training that made this facility look like summer camp. She had completed missions in Afghanistan, Syria, and several classified locations that didn't officially exist on any map. Her small stature had actually been an advantage in many operations, allowing her to move through spaces and blend into environments where larger operators couldn't. "I understand your concerns," Sarah said, picking up her bag again. "But I'm here on orders, just like you are. Orders can be changed, William said with a nasty grin. Especially when someone realizes they've made a mistake. The group was getting more aggressive now, their body language becoming threatening. Sarah could see that they were working themselves up to actually try to physically intimidate her or force her to leave. She had dealt with hostile forces in war zones, but there was something particularly frustrating about dealing with arrogant young men who thought they knew everything. Cadet Brooks, who had been mostly silent, finally spoke up. Maybe we should show her what the training is really like. Give her a taste of what she's in for. The suggestion sent a ripple of excitement through the group. Sarah could see them mentally preparing for what they thought would be an easy demonstration of their superiority. They had no idea that they were about to make the biggest mistake of their military careers. That's not necessary, Sarah said quietly. But even as she spoke, she was mentally cataloging each cadet's position, their likely fighting abilities based on their builds and stances, and the best way to handle the situation if it escalated beyond words. Oh, but I think it is, Jackson replied, cracking his knuckles. See, we have a tradition here. New people have to prove they belong. And honestly, looking at you, I don't think you can. The morning sun was now fully up, casting sharp shadows across the training yard. Other groups were beginning their exercises, but this confrontation was happening in a relatively isolated area near the newer barracks. Sarah realized that these cadets had probably planned this, choosing a time and place where they thought they could intimidate her without interference. What they didn't realize was that they had just surrounded one of the most dangerous people on the entire base. Jackson took another step forward, close enough now that Sarah could smell the coffee on his breath from breakfast. The other cadets had tightened their circle, clearly expecting to enjoy watching what they thought would be an easy intimidation of the new officer. Here's how this works, Jackson said, his voice taking on a menacing tone. We're going to give you a little demonstration of what real training looks like. Maybe some hand-to-hand combat basics. If you can't handle that, then you definitely don't belong here with us. Sarah remained perfectly still, her breathing steady and controlled. She was running through different scenarios in her mind, calculating the best approach if this situation required physical intervention. Her years of SEAL training had taught her that the best fights were the ones you never had to have, but sometimes conflict was unavoidable. I don't think that's necessary, she repeated. But her tone had changed slightly. There was something in her voice now that should have warned the cadets they were making a serious mistake. Morrison stepped up beside Jackson, flexing his considerable muscles. Come on, Lieutenant. Just a friendly sparring match. Unless you're too scared? The word scared hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah almost smiled at the irony. She had rappelled from helicopters into hostile territory, engaged enemy combatants in close-quarters battle, and completed missions that would give these young men nightmares. Fear was something she had learned to manage and control years ago. You know what? Williams chimed in. Maybe we should make this interesting. If she can take down just one of us, we'll leave her alone. But when she can't, she agrees to request a transfer out of our program. The group murmured their agreement, clearly thinking this was the most reasonable proposal they had ever made. They were so confident in their assessment of Sarah that they couldn't imagine any other outcome. I don't make deals with cadets, Sarah replied calmly. And I suggest you all step back and continue with your regular training schedule. But the cadets were too worked up to listen to reason now. They had committed to their course of action and were feeding off each other's energy. Peterson cracked his knuckles loudly, while Brooks bounced slightly on his feet like a boxer preparing for a match. Come on, Lieutenant, Jackson taunted. Just one little demonstration. Show us what they taught you in officer school. What they couldn't have known was that Sarah hadn't learned to fight in officer school. She had learned in the brutal crucible of SEAL training, where only the absolute best survived. She had been one of only 3 women to successfully complete the program in her class, and she had done it by being twice as tough and 3 times as determined as most of the men around her. Last chance, Sarah said quietly. Walk away now, and we can all pretend this conversation never happened. But Jackson was already moving, reaching out to grab her shoulder in what he probably thought was a friendly but firm gesture of dominance. His hand was still 6 inches away when Sarah moved. The transformation was instant and shocking. The quiet, seemingly helpless woman disappeared, replaced by a precision fighting machine that moved with deadly efficiency. Sarah's left hand intercepted Jackson's reaching arm. Her right struck a pressure point at his elbow, and before he could even register what was happening, she had redirected his momentum and sent him stumbling backward into Peterson. Morrison reacted next, throwing a wild haymaker that Sarah ducked under easily. She came up inside his guard, delivered a controlled strike to his solar plexus that doubled him over, then used his own weight against him to send him to the ground. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds. Williams tried to grab her from behind, but Sarah had already sensed his movement. She shifted her weight, threw her elbow back into his ribs with surgical precision, then grabbed his extended arm and used a basic judo throw to send him flying over her shoulder. He hit the ground hard, but safely. Sarah had controlled the throw to avoid serious injury. Brooks and Peterson rushed her together, thinking their numbers would overwhelm her. Sarah sidestepped Peterson's charge completely, letting his momentum carry him past her, then focused on Brooks. She blocked his punch, countered with a strike to his wrist that caused him to immediately drop his guard, then swept his legs and guided him to the ground with another controlled throw. Peterson, having recovered from Jackson's collision, came at her again with more caution this time. But caution wasn't enough against someone with Sarah's training and experience. She feinted left, moved right, caught his extended arm, and used leverage to put him in a position where he had no choice but to go to the ground or risk serious injury to his shoulder. The entire confrontation lasted less than 30 seconds. 8 confident, aggressive cadets were now sitting on the ground, looking up at Sarah with expressions of complete shock and confusion. Not one of them had managed to land a single blow or even come close to restraining her. Sarah straightened her uniform, picked up her duffel bag, and looked down at the cadets with the same calm expression she had worn throughout the encounter. "Now," she said in the same quiet voice, "I suggest you all report to your regular training assignments. And in the future, you might want to be more careful about making assumptions." Jackson was holding his elbow and staring at her with a mixture of pain and bewilderment. "What? How did you? Who are you?" "I'm Lieutenant Chen," she replied simply. "And I'm here to participate in your advanced training program." As she spoke, the sound of approaching footsteps caught everyone's attention. Sergeant Major Rodriguez was walking toward them, his weathered face showing the kind of expression that suggested he had seen the tail end of the confrontation. "Cadets," he called out in a voice that carried across the training yard. "Is there a reason you're all sitting on the ground during training hours?" The young men scrambled to their feet, their faces red with embarrassment and confusion. They looked at Sarah, then at their instructor, clearly unsure how to explain what had just happened. "We were just introducing ourselves to the new lieutenant," Morrison managed to stammer. Rodriguez's eyes moved from the disheveled cadets to Sarah, who stood perfectly composed with her bag over her shoulder. His expression suggested that he had a pretty good idea of what had really taken place. "I see," he said slowly. "And how did these introductions go?" "Very educational," Sarah replied with the slightest hint of a smile. The sergeant major studied her for a long moment, taking in her calm demeanor and the obvious contrast with the flustered cadets around her. Something in his expression suggested that he might know more about Lieutenant Chen than he was letting on. "Cadets," he said finally, "report to the obstacle course immediately. You're already behind schedule, and I don't appreciate having to come looking for you." "Yes, Sergeant Major," they replied in unison, grateful for the excuse to escape the awkward situation. As they began to move away, Rodriguez turned his attention to Sarah. "Lieutenant Chen, I presume?" "Yes, Sergeant Major. I've been expecting you. We need to discuss your training schedule and objectives." As they walked toward the main building, Sarah could feel the eyes of the cadets on her back. She knew that word of this encounter would spread quickly through the facility, and her hopes of maintaining a low profile had probably just evaporated. But sometimes, she reflected, it was better to establish respect early, rather than deal with constant challenges to her authority. These cadets had learned an important lesson about making assumptions, and hopefully, it would make the rest of her time here more productive. What she didn't know was that this encounter was about to change everything about her mission at Fort Braxton. Sergeant Major Rodriguez led Sarah into the main administrative building, his boots echoing off the polished concrete floors. The walls were lined with photographs of previous training classes and commendation certificates, a testament to the facility's proud history of producing elite military personnel. "My office is this way," Rodriguez said, gesturing down a hallway lined with small offices and briefing rooms. As they walked, Sarah noticed him glancing at her with what seemed like curiosity mixed with respect. Once inside his office, Rodriguez closed the door and gestured for Sarah to take a seat. The room was spartanly decorated with military precision: a desk, 2 chairs, filing cabinets, and a wall covered with training schedules and operational charts. "Before we discuss your official assignment here," Rodriguez began, settling behind his desk, "I think we need to address what just happened outside." Sarah maintained her professional composure. "The cadets were concerned about my ability to handle the training program. I demonstrated that their concerns were unfounded. When the Tech-9, I demonstrated that their concerns were unfounded." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. "Lieutenant Chen, I've been running training programs for 15 years. I've seen a lot of people come through here, including some very capable officers. What I witnessed outside wasn't standard military training. That was something else entirely." The Fornig sport, Sarah remained silent, unsure how much Rodriguez knew about her real background and how much she was authorized to reveal. "Let me be direct," Rodriguez continued. "Your orders came down through channels I don't usually see. High-level clearances, need-to-know classifications. And now I've just watched you handle 8 trained cadets like they were children. So I'm going to ask you straight out. Who exactly are you, Lieutenant Chen?" Sarah weighed her options carefully. Her cover story was that she was a regular naval officer being rotated through advanced training, but Rodriguez clearly suspected there was more to the situation. "I'm sorry, Sergeant Major, but I'm not authorized to discuss certain aspects of my background or current assignment." Rodriguez nodded slowly, as if this response confirmed his suspicions. "I figured as much. But here's the thing. Those cadets you just tangled with? They're not going to keep quiet about what happened. By lunchtime, everyone on this base will know that the new lieutenant took down 8 men without breaking a sweat." This was exactly what Sarah had been hoping to avoid. Her mission required her to observe the training program and assess its effectiveness for potential SEAL candidates. But that would be difficult if everyone knew she was something other than a regular officer. "I was hoping to maintain a lower profile," Sarah admitted. "Well, that ship has sailed," Rodriguez replied with a slight smile. "But maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. You see, Lieutenant, I've been having some problems with this particular group of cadets. They're skilled, but they're also arrogant. They think they know everything already, and it's been making them resistant to instruction." Sarah could see where this was heading, and she wasn't sure she liked the direction. "What I'm thinking," Rodriguez continued, "is that maybe having someone with your obvious capabilities involved in their training might humble them a bit. Teach them that there's always more to learn." Rodriguez continued, "Tu m'en lease. Teach them that there's always more to learn. Sergeant Major, I'm here to observe and evaluate, not to participate directly in training exercises. Officially, yes. But your orders do give you broad discretionary authority in how you conduct your evaluation, don't they?" Sarah had to admit that was true. Her mission parameters were deliberately vague, allowing her to adapt her approach based on what she observed. Before she could respond, there was a knock at the office door. Rodriguez called for whoever it was to enter, and Jackson appeared, looking considerably more subdued than he had an hour earlier. "Sergeant Major, sir, I need to speak with you about what happened this morning." Rodriguez gestured for Jackson to sit in the remaining chair. "Go ahead, cadet." Jackson glanced nervously at Sarah before speaking. "Sir, I think there may have been some kind of misunderstanding. The new lieutenant. She's not what we expected." "In what way?" Rodriguez asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Sir, she handled all 8 of us like we were beginners. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, Morrison is a regional boxing champion, and Williams was a college wrestler, but she made us look like children. Rodriguez turned to Sarah. That's quite an impressive skill set for a regular naval officer. Wouldn't you say, Lieutenant? Sarah realized that any pretense of being a normal officer had just become impossible to maintain. I may have had some additional training that wasn't included in my standard file. Jackson's eyes widened. Additional training? Ma'am, what kind of additional training teaches you to take down 8 people in 30 seconds? Rodriguez held up a hand to stop Jackson from asking more questions. Cadet, I think what matters now is that you and your classmates understand that Lieutenant Chen is here for a reason, and you need to treat her with the respect due to a superior officer. Is that clear? Yes, sir. But, sir, the other guys are asking questions. They want to know who she really is. This was exactly the complication Sarah had been hoping to avoid. Her real mission was to evaluate whether the advanced training program was producing candidates suitable for SEAL selection, but that required observing normal training conditions. If everyone knew she was a SEAL operator, it would change the entire dynamic. Tell the other cadets, Rodriguez said carefully, that Lieutenant Chen is here on a classified assignment, and any discussion of this morning's events outside of official channels is forbidden. Anyone caught speculating about her background or mission will be removed from the program. Is that understood? Yes, sir. After Jackson left, Rodriguez turned back to Sarah. That should buy us some time, but the cat's out of the bag. Everyone knows you're not a typical officer, Sarah sighed, recognizing that her mission had just become much more complicated. What do you suggest? Sergeant Major, I suggest we make the best of the situation. These cadets need to learn humility and respect for capabilities they might not immediately recognize. Maybe having someone like you around will teach them those lessons better than any lecture I could give. Over the next few days, word of the confrontation spread throughout the facility, but Rodriguez's warning kept most speculation quiet. The cadets in Sarah's group were noticeably more respectful and attentive during training exercises, though she could see them watching her carefully, trying to figure out who she really was. Sarah found herself in an unusual position. She had originally planned to observe training from the sidelines, but her cover was blown, and she was now inevitably part of the dynamic she was supposed to evaluate. Rodriguez began consulting with her on training methods and asking for her input on cadet performance, effectively making her an unofficial instructor. The change in the cadets' attitudes was remarkable. Jackson, who had been the ringleader of the confrontation, became one of the most dedicated students. He approached training with a new seriousness, asking thoughtful questions and pushing himself harder than ever before. Ma'am, he said after a particularly challenging exercise, I want to apologize for how we acted that first day. We thought we knew what we were talking about, but we obviously didn't. Sarah appreciated the apology, but she was more interested in the lesson he had learned. What would you do differently now if you encountered someone new to the program? Jackson thought carefully before answering. I'd remember that there's a lot I don't know yet, and that people might have capabilities that aren't obvious at first glance. I'd focus on learning from them instead of trying to prove myself. This was exactly the kind of maturity Sarah had been hoping to see in potential SEAL candidates. The confrontation that had threatened to derail her mission had actually provided valuable insights into how these young people responded to humbling experiences. As her time at Fort Braxton continued, Sarah found herself genuinely impressed with the training program. The cadets were learning not just physical skills, but mental resilience and adaptability. The encounter that had revealed her identity had ultimately made her evaluation more thorough and accurate. When she finally submitted her report, Sarah was able to recommend the program for SEAL candidate preparation with complete confidence. The cadets had demonstrated exactly the kind of growth and adaptability that would serve them well in the most challenging military operations. Years later, when some of those same cadets successfully completed SEAL training themselves, they would remember the day they learned that assumptions could be dangerous, and that true strength often came in unexpected packages. The lieutenant, who had seemed so out of place, had taught them one of the most valuable lessons of their military careers. That in the special operations community, You could never judge an operator by appearances alone.